Finally, we will hear from Michael Berger, Principal Defense and Aerospace Market Sector Leader at Capgemini Government Solutions. As digital vulnerabilities can translate into real-world threats, the security of our nation's defense industrial base has never been more critical. Many contractors that work with the DoD overlook this aspect of their responsibilities, but security is more than a contractual obligation. Michael brings a unique blend of public and private expertise to this session. His journey began in advising on defense policy issues for the Senate Armed Services Committee in the U.S. Senate. He also spent years representing aerospace and defense companies on Capitol Hill and government agencies as a lobbyist at BAE Systems and AIA, serving as a vital link between the company and federal decision makers. He's been with Capgemini for more than 7 years, leading the organization's overall defense strategy. This foundational experience in shaping national defense strategy provides Michael with an unparalleled perspective on the criticality of CMMC implementation. Thank you for joining us today, Michael.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Very excited about this conversation. I really just want to jump right in. We have so much to talk about, and your unique perch and kind of where you sit and what you do, I think, is just going to offer our audience tremendous insight here. So I'd love to start just by understanding how you see the federal government's efforts to regulate cybersecurity for defense contractors evolving over, say, the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for having me, and great question to start. Right, there's a number of things that contractors are going to have to focus on over the next 5 to 10 years. But really, it boils down to basically there's going to be more increased standardization. There's going to be more of a push for collaboration, and obviously there's some driving factors that are going to be important in this landscape. So obviously, one is CMMC, right, which the program is nearing implementation. It's basically asking contractors to ensure robust cybersecurity practices are in place. So cybersecurity maturity model certification, CMMC, will play a big role over the next 5 to 10 years. Contractors are going to need to self-certify, obtain third-party certification, and even achieve DoD certification on top of third-party validation. So that's going to be a big driver in the landscape. The second thing that's out there is this Executive Order 14028, which was issued in 2024. And this order it's emphasizing cloud computing, implementing zero trust architecture, and then mandating multi-factor authentication and encryption. The last few areas that contractors are really going to have to be focused on is around some of the standardization of cyber requirements. So if you've seen what the FAR Council recently came out with, more requirements for federal contractors to deal with unclassified federal information systems, and these rules are aimed at kind of harmonizing obligations across the board. Finally, I think this landscape will demand more collaboration and innovation. So how do you balance national security concerns with global collaboration? That's very important. And the government is likely going to encourage more public-private partnerships. They're going to demand and drive and foster innovation, want more innovation, and obviously adapting these regulations to address some of the threats. So the next 5 to 10 years are going to be really a changing landscape, and some of the things that are coming out, this year and next year are going to set that landscape.
That's a fascinating take, Michael. I mean, as you laid those things out so well, it's kind of amazing when you think about the velocity and all the different angles, whether it's the FAR Council, CMMC, executive orders, defense contractors have a lot to contend with. And as you, I think, rightly point out, one of the, I think, important ways to kind of meet those challenges will be public and private partnerships, because there is just it's a complex landscape, and I was wondering what specific challenges, given kind of the overview that you just shared, do you anticipate for defense contractors, given the increasing complexity of all these regulations coming from every angle?
Yeah, great question. I mean, to begin with, cost and compliance burdens are going to be, I think, really far-reaching. So to implement, robust cybersecurity measures can be expensive. And so contractors have got to, allocate resources. They've got to train, audit, technology upgrades to all to meet these regulatory requirements. So it's certainly going to come at a cost and a compliance burden. Next, right, just the landscape is so evolves so quickly, and it's going to take education, right? So navigating CMMC, navigating FAR rules, and other standards can be daunting for some of these companies. Supply chain risk, right? When you think of contractors relying on a network of suppliers, they've got to ensure their suppliers are compliant and meeting these regulatory requirements as well. And then this balance of security versus efficiency. So you got to strike the right balance between operational efficiency and the right controls being in place so that they don't slow down processes or affect productivity. But there's a number of challenges, right, that the industry is facing. But I think those are really the biggest in my view.
Yeah, those are pretty meaningful, and I think you bring home a great point, is that there's still a mission that has to be served, and so there are those challenges. And given the global nature, particularly of your business, but also many defense contractors, what role do you see the cloud or cloud technologies playing in the future of defense contractor operations, particularly as it concerns cybersecurity and kind of the way that you've set the table for the audience here today?
Yeah, I think cloud computing is going to play a major role, right? So when you think of cloud, it's all around scalability, flexibility, and efficiency. And then when you couple that with what you're trying to develop and implement around the cybersecurity, right? These are more, it gets more complex, right? But some of the key considerations, right, when you think about cloud computing is number one, around encryption and data protection. So strong encryption mechanisms to safeguard sensitive data that are stored in the cloud, right? Controlling who can access these environments. So really identity and access control is critical, right? You want to be able to properly authenticate and authorize the right users, or unauthorized access has to be tempered, right? The next one is continuous monitoring. So how do you regularly monitor cloud infrastructure for suspicious activity, right? That's going to be critical as companies move into a cloud first strategy. And then also, I think, right, incident response and recovery protocols. You got to have well-defined plans in place to respond to security incidents, and you got to be able to swiftly address breaches and recover systems. So, there's certainly lots of benefits to a cloud first strategy, but also you've got to think hard around the controls and who has access to the infrastructure and environments. A good question.
That's a super comprehensive answer, Michael. And on the cloud front, just kind of as we heard you kind of again paint the landscape for us, I'd love to kind of maybe go to the next level of detail because you have such a unique perch again in where you sit and how you interface with the government, and maybe understand a little bit, given all the complexities you've articulated for us, how does your organization stay ahead of the curve in terms of meeting these new and emerging federal cybersecurity requirements?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is you've got to take a proactive approach. But really, there's several things that organizations need to do. One, it's you got to continuously learn and train. So regularly educate employees about threats, compliance changes, and best practices. Right, encouraging certifications and workshops continue to learn and train. Collaboration with your industry peers is important. So participating in industry forums such as this one, conferences and working groups are important so that companies and entities can share and learn from other experiences, right? Threat intelligence. So potentially investing in threat intelligence services to stay informed about emerging threats is going to be important, right? As you think about the global landscape and global threats. You got to be able to adopt these policies in an agile manner. So the regulatory framework and some of the requirements change regularly. So you got to be able to regularly review and update your policies and procedures. There's a couple others, right? Third-party audits. You got to be able to engage third-party auditors to assess compliance. So someone who's going to bring a fresh perspective and identify blind spots. And then, technology partnerships, technology enablement is going to be increasingly important. So collaborating with technology providers who, prioritize security, and you want to leverage their expertise to support the ever-changing landscape.
Amazing. I mean, it's a pretty big mountain to climb for any defense contractor. But what I love about some of the answers you're sharing here is that you're laying out kind of some of the challenges and complexities, but also the how around public-private partnerships, partnering with OEM technology partners, training your workforce. I mean, so what I really appreciate about these answers is it's not just here's the problem, is here's how some of the ways to solve it. Speaking about solving the problem, one of the other things that comes to mind is, competing jurisdictions relative to cybersecurity. So I'd love to understand what strategies do you employ to ensure compliance with different cybersecurity regulations across different jurisdictions? Because I'm sure you deal with that as well.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to tackle. Right, this impact around different jurisdictions. One, I think, right, you got to have your legal expertise and your security expertise aligned, right? So consulting, right, the legal experts who specialize in these areas is important, as they can provide specific requirements and insights into the regulations in different regions. Something that's also important that we're doing, obviously, conduct a risk assessment, so understanding the legal and compliance landscape in each jurisdiction where your organization operates, right? It's also something that we're doing is you want to tailor your cybersecurity policies and practices to align with local regulations. So what are those regulatory impacts that are going to be driving changes within the federal space? Those are things that we're really looking at. You want to adhere to global, cybersecurity standards such as, ISO 27001 as a baseline. Some of these frameworks, they transcend some national boundaries. Obviously from a cross-functional collaboration, this is something we're doing. So like I said, you want to involve your IT, your compliance, your legal team, and make sure that the teams are adequately, communicating and sharing updates around the security and compliance requirements. And then another thing is what we're doing is vendor management. So working with different vendors and different partners to ensure that they're also compliant. But it really starts with having a cohesive, right, IT, legal, and infrastructure engagement team who understand where these regulations reside, by jurisdiction. But it's certainly complex topic, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think your answer makes it clear. I mean, I think our audience already understands, like, it's a team sport. I mean, you mentioned compliance, legal, IT. I mean, it really is a team sport to kind of deliver on this mission of cybersecurity. But also, with that as well, given international operations, state and local, federal regulation, the idea to try and measure once and comply many, so that you don't have all these stovepiped operations that are disparate. So if you can kind of integrate those requirements and get some alignment, sounds like that could be a force multiplier. What are your thoughts on how, given your background, I think you're really perfectly situated to answer this question from the regulatory front. How do you think the government might, if ever, harmonize cybersecurity regulations across the U.S. government to get from where we are today, where in some cases every agency has almost a different set of regulations, to a place where there's more of a baseline?
Yeah, it's a hard problem to solve, because it's complex, and I think, I'm obviously, working across federal agencies, data sharing and sharing information is sometimes really hard, but I think there's a few things that can be done to kind of break down the barriers. One is thinking about this in a kind of a unified framework perspective. So it's basically a framework that would consolidate or bunch, existing regulations together. And this framework would be able to address, security controls, risk management, and reporting requirements. That's one thing. Another thing that, is really going to be important, and something that agencies have had challenges with, is just interagency collaboration. Some do it better than others, but encouraging collaboration among these agencies, sharing best practices, threat intelligence, lesson learned. Those are going to be huge as you look at how to consolidate and think through one lens. Another option is, and ideas are around risk-based approaches. So, prioritizing risk based on the data and critical infrastructure that you're dealing with, and then tailor the regulations accordingly, rather than a kind of one size fits all model. Talked a lot about public-private partnerships. So engaging private sector is going to be huge, and the stakeholders in private sector getting their expertise around, what it makes sense from a practical implementation perspective, and to ensure that what's being rolled out has some consideration from the folks who got to deliver it. And then, regularly review and adapt as needed. I mentioned it shouldn't be a one size fits all. It's got to evolve with technology advancement. When you think of where we were 5 years ago to where we're going to be 5 years from now, the technology advancement is going to be wide and ever changing. So it should be something that is looked upon as future leaning, and not a one size fits all. So it needs to be agile as well.
Yeah, you mentioned public-private partnerships, and I think it's one of the areas that I give the government a lot of credit. And I think you touched on it where you said, around the collaboration piece that you get around sharing threat information, sharing incident response information, and the value there, but also that, I think not everybody appreciates this necessarily or knows this. In the defense industry, is that CMMC really is 15 plus years in the making as part of a public-private partnership that started in 2008, 2009, and answered the hard questions around how do we share threat information? How do we assess defense contractor networks? What's the standard? What are the operational legal implications? So it really is a very robust public-private partnership that's been in place with the DoD for now 15 years and counting. And I think it's actually an area where the government really doesn't get enough credit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
Michael, relative to public-private partnerships, how do you see those evolving in the context of improving cybersecurity in the defense sector?
Yeah, it's something we talked about, but I think it's going to be more important than ever given the ever evolving landscape and regulatory environment. But I think there's definitely some areas to focus on with this public-private partnership. One is, when you think of workforce development, the public-private partnerships can help address some of the cybersecurity skills gaps, right? So collaborating with training programs and initiatives, that'll be helpful. Information sharing, we talked about that. This is around facilitating an exchange of information around threat intelligence, best practices, and lesson learned. There's the opportunity for joint research and development. So some of these partnerships could potentially drive new innovation. So expecting, some of these efforts to develop cutting edge technologies that can be used for defense cybersecurity. And then the policy piece, right? When you have a strong public-private partnership, it has a direct impact on the policy that comes out. So these efforts can help shape regulations and balance, help balance security and operational needs. So really important endeavor.
Yeah, what I appreciate so much about that and the way you answered that is that, so often cybersecurity is kind of a gloom and doom subject, but there really is a lot of good things happening within the Department of Defense, the federal government at large, around specifically the public-private partnerships that are in place, and contractors really do have a seat at the table. So I think that your point around policy is just well taken, in that there is an ability to help shape, inform, and co-create great policy that works both for industry and for our federal partners. You mentioned innovation. I'm curious what you think around what innovation specifically in cybersecurity do you believe will have the most significant impact on the defense industry relative to cybersecurity in the next coming years?
Yeah, innovation is moving at such a rapid pace that it's definitely going to reshape, the defense industry. I think there's some critical technologies that are going to have significant impact. So number one is going to be, artificial intelligence powered defense. So AI, machine learning, deep learning around driving automated threat management. So these technologies are going to be able to enhance anomaly detection, predictive analytics, and response capabilities. So that's a huge one. The second one around innovation is identity management. So, solutions that are around zero trust architecture and biometric authentication are going to play pivotal roles. Governance is one that we often don't think about when we think of innovation, but organizations are focusing on, robust governance frameworks given the regulatory impacts. And then, clear policies, risk assessments, and compliance measures are going to be critical as you think of that cyber governance innovation. And then the final one that I think is been talked about recently is around endpoint protection. So some of these endpoint detection and response tools are going to evolve to, help combat some of these sophisticated attacks. As we think about, more remote work becoming prevalent, this will be really, really important. But I think those are a few that are going to definitely have significant impact.
It's interesting in that we've got all the regulatory actions, sometimes coordinated, sometimes disparate, depending on the agency. You touched on kind of at least three that our audience should be aware of. You've got innovation happening. All of this is really, for the purposes of national security, ultimately. How do you think about striking the balance between national security concerns and then the obvious need for global collaboration as it relates to cybersecurity? How do you see that evolving?
So when you look at the global landscape and the economic global landscape, global collaboration in cybersecurity is evolving and will evolve even more. And the things that are critical and important and certainly are going to impact the policies are, number one is around interoperability and information sharing. So think about safeguarding those national interests. And so what do we need to share? What do we need to collaborate with our partners? What do we not need to share? What do we lock down? So I think the collaboration efforts to combat cyber threats collectively is important as you look at the global landscape. The second thing is around standardization. So harmonizing cybersecurity standards across nations are going to be able to enhance collaboration. So whether it's a global framework or something similar, these can facilitate, secure information exchange without compromising security. We already talked about public-private partnerships, government and private sector, collaborating on joint initiatives is going to be important to this one. And then cross-border incident response. So, cyber incidents are now, they're transcending borders. So we've got to expect coordinated responses involved international agencies and private organizations. And so those are some of the big buckets to think about when you're talking about, balancing national security and global collaboration.
Yeah, really interesting. What again comes across in all your answers are so thoughtful around kind of here's the problem, here's some potential solutions, and I really think it's really a breath of fresh air, frankly, because so often, again, I think it is a bit of a gloom and doom space, but I think there's what I'm taking from a lot of what you're sharing is that there are solutions out there. And there's a lot of people working on those, and it's just very, very thoughtful set of answers that, frankly, I think paints a pretty hopeful picture for cybersecurity. I'd be curious. You've been super generous with your time, so I want to kind of make this the last question and just be respectful of that. But given your unique seat, kind of how you've looked at these challenges from every angle, I'd love to just close with any advice you have for other defense contractors looking to navigate cybersecurity and the complex landscape that comes with it.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to consider, and certainly, companies have got a lot on their plate when it comes to cybersecurity in the regulatory environment. I think the most important component is just to stay informed. So monitor the regulatory impacts, threat intelligence, what are the industry trends. So awareness is such a key component because if you're not tracking some of these updates, then you're likely going to be out of compliance. The other thing to think about is, understanding your organization's risk profile. So prioritizing critical information and assets, and being able to allocate resources accordingly. That is going to be critical as we move forward in this kind of new and evolving landscape, right? Complying with the regulations around whether it's FAR rules or CMMC or some of these executive orders. When you invest in training and audits, these are things that'll keep you ahead of the curve and prepared for some of these regulations. And the last thought is really it's around collaboration and adaptability. So being able to collaborate with your peers, industry leaders, technology experts in the space, right, to share best practices, to learn from the best is going to be important. And then, be adaptable. So threats evolve very rapidly. So, companies have to be agile in the way you adjust your security posture, and the way you implement your security programs. And so I think, given where we're at and where we're going, I think it's critical for companies to just keep these things in mind as we try to, prevent massive cybersecurity attacks.
Yeah, I think, Michael, that's an amazing way to close because what our goal always is with this conference every year, we've been doing it for many years now with speakers like yourself, is to give the audience something actionable that they can go take away, bring back with them as they work to get further along in their journey to compliance and to better cybersecurity. And I think that you've given us a lot that's actionable and that the audience can take back and in a way to go kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time and make progress. So I want to thank you. I know this will be kind of one of the highlights for the conference relative to people being able to take something that actually moves them further in their journey to compliance. So Michael, thank you again for all your time today and being so generous with us.
Yeah, Eric, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the back and forth candor, and certainly look forward to the conference, and certainly thank you for your time.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing the strategic insights needed to navigate CMMC compliance.